Hello, everyone. It's Rabbi Akiva Males, and I hope you're well. A good moed. I know that today's going to be very busy as we all prepare for the final days of Pesach. So I wanted to share this Dvar Torah with you early. Hopefully it'll enhance your day as you make your preparations, and hopefully it'll give us something to think about over the final days of Pesach. I want to start by sharing with you a tefillah. This is a very unique tefillah. I'll share the context with you soon. Let me first read it to you, and I'll preface it by saying this is a tefillah that I hope none of us will ever have to recite, and no member of Klal Yisrael should ever have to recite. I'll soon tell you the context. Here's the tefillah. It's titled, Lifnei Achilas Chametz Yomar B'Kavanas Alev. He says, before someone eats chametz on Pesach, they should say this tefillah with an incredible amount of kavana, intent, emotion. Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven, Hinei Galui V'Yadu L'Fanecha. It's well known before you. We really want to fulfill your will. There's nothing we want more than to celebrate Pesach properly as we eat matzah and refrain from eating any chametz whatsoever. But for this reason, we are heartbroken. The slavery that we find ourselves in, it's holding us back. It's preventing us from fulfilling this mitzvah. We find ourselves in a situation at which we are at risk, our very lives are at risk. And therefore we are prepared and we are willing in order to fulfill a different one of your mitzvahs. Which mitzvah? In your Torah it says v'chai b'hem, and Chazal darshan that we're supposed to live through the observance of mitzvahs, and they say v'lo sheyamus b'hem. We're not supposed to die by observing the mitzvahs, unless it's the three cardinal sins. And we're going to fulfill another one of your commands, which is to be very careful about the warning of Hishamer L'cha U'shmor Nafshecha Ma'od, to take every measure possible to do everything we can to look after our physical well-being. Therefore, our prayer to you is as follows. You should allow us to live. And you should allow us to continue to exist. And you should redeem us as soon as possible. So we will once again be able to fulfill and observe all of your statutes, and to do and fully fulfill your will, and to serve you with our complete hearts. Amen. What is the story of this tefillah? This tefillah was recited at the last Pesach Seder that was held in Bergen-Belsen, one of the notorious concentration camps that the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, that they built to annihilate and to destroy the Jewish people. And we know, and this is so timely, Bergen-Belsen was liberated 75 years ago on the 15th of April. That's going to be the seventh day of Pesach, Shvi Shel Pesach this year. And the secular date, April 15th, in 1945, 75 years ago, that's the day that British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen. And in the last Pesach that was spent in Bergen-Belsen, this tefillah was secretly composed and recited by Rabbi Aaron Yisachar Davids. Rabbi Aaron Yisachar Davids was born in 1895, unfortunately died just a few months before Bergen-Belsen was liberated in 1945. And he was the chief rabbi of Rotterdam in Holland. He was a Dutch Jew, and he led the Jews of his community. He was with them when they were deported to Bergen-Belsen. And the last Pesach that he was alive in Bergen-Belsen, he composed this tefillah. He secretly assembled all the Jews that he could who wanted to take a big risk, really taking their life in their hands, and gather late at night in the barracks for this Seder. Rabbi Davids tried to do everything he could to remember all the Haggadah. And when they got to the part of Achilas Matzah, they had no matzah to eat. They had these terrible rations of bread that the Nazis had given them. And before they ate that bread, they recited that tefillah that Rabbi Davids composed. Tragically, he died just shortly before liberation of Bergen-Belsen. But that tefillah was actually carried out. I'm holding it up to the camera, but I'm going to supply you with a link as well in the email that I sent out with this. This tefillah was carried out by some survivors of Bergen-Belsen, was given to family members of Rabbi Davids who survived, made its way to Israel, and it is now housed in the Ghetto Fighters House Museum in Israel. And it's been reported, it was reported in the papers in Israel just a few years ago, how they were so excited to have this added to their archives. It was in 2013. So just about 7 years ago, this item was donated to that museum. I'm seeing many rabbis quote this tefillah this year Pesach, and I think it's pretty obvious why they're quoting it. They're quoting this to tell us, you know what, this isn't the first year that we had to celebrate Pesach in a fashion that was, so to say, incomplete. That was nowhere near the Pesach that we wanted to celebrate. And there are some parallels in that fashion. However, I think we have to be very careful to draw some distinctions between what we're experiencing and the context in which Rabbi David's composed this tefillah. Let's just remind ourselves, there was a Holocaust occurring when Rabbi David's composed this tefillah. There was a maniacal effort on the part of the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, to annihilate every Jew that they could get their hands on. That's not the conditions that we find ourselves in today, thank God. Yes, our Pesach is different. We weren't able to have a table full of guests, relatives, loved ones, friends, family members surrounding us. We couldn't have that this year. But none of us was feeling threatened by an external enemy that was bent on annihilating Am Yisrael, the Jewish people. There's a virus that's at loose. There's a pandemic that's at loose in this world right now, and it's not discriminating. It knows no borders. Every nation is at risk. Every religion is at risk. It's not specifically targeting Klal Yisrael. At the same time, our Pesach was different. We did not have shul, we didn't have minyan, and everything that goes along with that. We didn't have many of our guests and relatives, we said. But let's look at what we did have. We had the opportunity to fulfill every single one of the mitzvahs of Pesach. Where Rabbi David was so heartbroken about was not just that he didn't have guests around his tables. They had to eat chametz on Pesach because they had to fulfill the mitzvah b'chai behen. They didn't have matzah, but they had to fulfill a different mitzvah. Baruch Hashem, that's not what we faced this Pesach. We were able to be Mekayim. We fulfilled every single one of the mitzvahs. When we sat at our Pesach Seder, we fulfilled the 2 Deoraisas that are applicable nowadays without a Korban Pesach. We were able to fulfill and engage in Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. It may have been with our immediate family. It may have just been with a spouse. And sadly, there's many of us out there who had to say it all by themselves. But nonetheless, they were able to say it with a Haggadah in front of them. Number 2, they were able to fulfill the mitzvah of Achilas Matzah. Every Jew, if they wanted to this year, there was nothing holding anyone back from fulfilling the mitzvah of Achilas Matzah. And there were all the D'Rabbanans. There were the 4 cups of wine. There was Marar. We were able to fulfill absolutely everything that was out there. So let's be careful. As much as people are referencing this tefillah that Rabbi David's composed for a tragic set of circumstances 75 years ago, let's also remember and thank God, Baruch Hashem, how fortunate we are that yes, our Pesach was different, but it was an entirely different set of circumstances than what Rabbi David's was facing. And Baruch Hashem, thank God we were able to fulfill every single one of the mitzvahs that needed to be fulfilled this Pesach. So let's all bear that in mind and let's keep things focused and in perspective. There's another point of his tefillah that I wanted to bring out though, that Rabbi David's, you could see in his tefillah, was absolutely heartbroken about the fact that they had no matzah to eat and that they had to eat chametz and fulfill that other mitzvah of v'chai b'hem and ushmartem od lenafshosechem. But he writes there, Dava libenu, they were absolutely heartbroken. And the question that someone might have as they read that is, what was the big deal? What were they so heartbroken about? We know the halachic principle of ones rachmana patre. We know that Hashem will not hold anything against us. If we were in a scenario, in a situation where we could not fulfill any of his mitzvahs, it won't be held against us. Ones rachmana patre. Hashem knows if we were compelled that we were unable to observe a mitzvah, or if we had to violate something, if there was true compulsion going on, we are pater. We will not be held accountable. If that's the case, why was Rabbi David's and the others around them feeling dava libenu? Why were their hearts so broken? And I think many of us know the answer to this, but we might just not have the vocabulary to use. So I want to share with you a source that I think addresses this perfectly. And this is from the Maharal of Prague, but let me share with you the background. In Parshas Bahaloscha, in Sefer Bamidbar, we read about the only time that Klal Yisrael brought the Korban Pesach during the 40 years that they spent in the Midbar, in the wilderness, between when they left Mitzrayim until they go into Eretz Yisrael. We know that as long as they were traveling and they were on the road after the Cheder Egel, after the sin of the golden calf, they were not able to have bris milah, and because they couldn't have bris milah, they couldn't circumcise their males, they weren't able to bring the Korban Pesach. That's what we know. But there was one occasion before they started traveling, the first time they found themselves out there for Pesach in Parshas Baloscha, that was the only time in all the 40 years they were in the wilderness they brought the Korban Pesach. And the Pasuk tells us as follows in Baloscha. It's right at the beginning of Perek Tes. The Pasuk tells us as follows: Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe. Hashem speaks to Moshe b'midbar Sinai. V'shana Hashem yitzlitzesam me'eretz Mitzrayim b'chodesh harishon le'mor. In the second year since leaving Mitzrayim, in the first month, which is Nisan, here's what he says: Vayasu b'nei Yisrael sa Pesach b'moado. B'nei Yisrael, they should take this opportunity to fulfill all the mitzvahs of Pesach, and this is the one time all the years in the Midbar that they brought the korban Pesach. And Rashi quotes a Chazal that tells us as follows, that this was Gnusan Shal Yisrael. This was very embarrassing. This was detrimental information about Bnei Yisrael. That all those years in the wilderness, they only brought korban Pesach once. All 40 years they were in the wilderness. This was the only time they were able to bring a korban Pesach. The Maharal of Prague, we know, wrote his Perush, a commentary on Rashi called the Gur Aryeh. And the Maharal asks a question, a very straightforward question. Why is this Gnusan Shal Yisrael? Why is this so embarrassing? Why is this information so embarrassing? We know the halachic principle of Ones Rachman Apatre. They couldn't bring the korban Pesach once they started traveling in the Midbar after the Chet Egel. Why? Because they couldn't have bris milah. It wasn't safe to have bris milah when they were traveling, and they didn't have the proper protection. The winds weren't blowing right. However, that's to be understood. They weren't able to have bris milah all those years in the wilderness, and because there's no bris milah, they can't have korban Pesach. Ones Rachmana Patre. Hashem understands they can't do it. It's like they're compelled not to have the mitzvah of korban Pesach, so he's not going to hold Bnei Yisrael accountable for it. What's to be embarrassed about? And the Maharal tells us we have to understand something. Whenever there's a mitzvah, whenever HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whenever God asks Bnei Yisrael to do something or to refrain from doing something, there are two things which take place. There are two separate and unique items that need to be addressed. Number one, did we fulfill Hashem's command? Did we fulfill God's directive? If we did, we put a check in the box. And if we didn't, unfortunately, there's an X there. So Ones Rachmana Patre says, if we were unable to fulfill God's command, then he's not going to hold that against us. But there's a second aspect that takes place whenever Hashem asks us, whenever God asks us to fulfill one of his directives. And that second aspect is an aliyah ruchni, spiritual elevation. We are feeding our neshama. We have a soul inside of us that can only be nourished through the performance of a mitzvah. So every time we fulfill a mitzvah, two things happen. Number one, we get credit for fulfilling a mitzvah. And number two, we grow spiritually from that experience. If we did not fulfill a mitzvah, we didn't fulfill Hashem's directive. But number two, we didn't have a spiritual growth experience. So what the Maharal says is that, yes, not having a korban Pesach all those years in the wilderness was gnus of Bnei Yisrael. It is embarrassing. Why? It's not embarrassing that we didn't fulfill God's directive. That's not going to be held against us because of the principle of Ones Rachmana Patre. Since we were compelled not to have a korban Pesach, he's not going to hold that against us. The second aspect is very embarrassing. For 40 years, we did not experience the aliyah ruchni. We didn't experience the spiritual elevation that can only happen when we fulfill God's commands. When we perform a mitzvah, a part of our neshama is uplifted. And for 40 years, we were only able to have the mitzvah of korban Pesach once. That means we didn't grow anywhere near as much as we should have during that whole time, in that time span in the Midbar. That's something to be embarrassed about. And that's something that Ones Rachmana Patre, the halachic principle, that Hashem won't hold compelling circumstances against us, that can't help, that can't replace that. That can't do anything to change the fact that we didn't experience spiritual growth. That's how the Maharal answers that. And I think that's why Rabbi David's included those words in his tefillah. He knows this principle. He may not have quoted the Maharal, but he knows this principle. And he understands. We're sitting in Bergen-Belsen. I'm together with my fellow inmates. And I understand Ones Rachmana Patre. There's no way Hashem's going to hold it against us that we couldn't eat matzah and that we had to eat chametz. There's something else, Dava Libenu. We're missing that spiritual elevation, that aliyah ruchni. Our neshama can't grow this Pesach in the only way that it can, by fulfilling the mitzvahs. And that's Dava Libenu. That's why he was so heartbroken. And I think we have to walk into these last days of Yom Tov, and we have to think about the Pesach, this very unprecedented a set of circumstances that we all shared this Pesach, and we have to hold our heads high. We have to say to ourselves, yes, there were some things we were not able to do. We couldn't be at shul. We couldn't be with the minyan. We couldn't fulfill the mitzvah of achnasas orchim, welcoming guests the way we would like to. Maybe some of our simchas yom tov was dampened because we didn't have all the people around our table. We weren't able to share with our friends, relatives, neighbors, loved ones as much. Okay, so there was some dampness there. But let's ask ourselves, go back to those two components. Were we able to fulfill all the mitzvahs? Absolutely. There was no mitzvah this Pesach that we were not able to fulfill. Whether it was d'oraisas, d'rabbanans, we got them all. Did we have the aliyah ruchni? Did we have the spiritual growth from this Pesach? Yes, we did. We fulfilled the matzah, sipur yitzias mitzrayim, the dalet kosos, maror, everything. We've got it all. Baruch Hashem, we could hold our heads proud. We have nothing to be embarrassed of. Yes, this was a very unique Pesach. It was unprecedented. There was so much we were not able to do, but we fulfilled all of our mitzvahs and we experienced the aliyah ruchni that our neshamas crave, and we could hold our heads high. We have nothing to be embarrassed of. I want to conclude by sharing one last idea, and that is many of our audience, many who are listening, are going to be reciting Yizkor on these last days of An Shmini Shal Pesach, the last day, the 8th day of Pesach. And it's going to be a very different Yizkor for many people than what they've recited till now. Many of us are used to reciting Yizkor together with the shul, with a tzibur. Now, that doesn't have to be. There's no part of the Yizkor that has to have a minyan. There's no Kaddish that said it's a Kelmalei. There's some short tefillos, and we ask Hashem to remember the neshamas of our loved ones, and we pledge to give tzedakah. All of that can be done in our own homes, without a minyan. And I'm going to supply a link in the email I'm sending out that has the texts to say. There's no part of the Yizkor that cannot be recited at home. So please don't anyone refrain from that, and don't feel bad about that. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Yizkor can be recited in our homes as we daven on Shmini Shal Pesach. At the same time, we're going to ask Hashem to remember our loved ones. And we're going to pledge tzedakah in their zuchus, in their merit. And we're going to ask Hashem to give them an aliyah ruchni. So think about what's going on. We're asking Hashem to supply their neshamas, their souls, in the olam neshamas, in the world of souls where they currently reside, to provide them with an aliyah, with spiritual elevation. Because of the mitzvahs that we're doing, because of the mitzvahs that we fulfilled on Pesach, because of the spiritual uplifting experiences that we enjoyed on Pesach, we're saying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we only experienced these mitzvahs, we were only engaged in them in the zuchus and the merit of those who preceded us, and we have them to thank for that. So because we had an aliyah ruchni, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bench them, bless them with an aliyah ruchni. With the tzedakah we're pledging as well, but also because of all the mitzvahs that we fulfilled and all the spiritual growth that we experienced. And that zuchus, may they have a spiritual aliyah as well, uplifting for their neshamas, for their lofty souls as well. So I think as we conclude Pesach, all of our collective prayers as follows. Our tefillah is Hashem should answer all of our prayers. Hashem should put an end to this pandemic, to this virus as soon as possible. So many people have suffered. So many families are suffering terribly. So many people tragically have passed away, and so many are in the hospital still suffering from their illnesses. Hashem should bless all those who are suffering, all those families who have lost loved ones with the nechama, with the comfort that only He could provide. Hashem should bless with a refuah shalema, a complete and speedy healing to all those who so urgently need one. Hashem should relieve the anxiety that all of us are feeling, whether it's about our parnasa, about our livelihoods, about contracting the illness, whatever it is. Hashem should free us from all of the anxieties that we feel, answer all of our tefillos. And as we're in Chodesh Nisan, the month of Nisan, which is the Chodesh HaGeula, the month of redemption, may Hashem answer all of our tefillos and bless us with the ultimate redemption that each and every one of us is praying for. Have a good Yom Tov, everyone.